Some performances end with a standing ovation, and then the audience forgets that the artist still has to go home alone. Someone who recorded immortal songs in a lavish studio, only to die in an empty apartment, without a single picture on the wall. A singer who made millions cry, died in a shabby motel and was discovered several days later. Another artist, who once shared the stage with James Brown, was found collapsed on the sofa, still holding the TV remote. That's just the beginning. 23 great souls, 23 stories of glory and oblivion are waiting for you to discover. Keep your heart strong, because what's coming next will make you choke up. Do you remember any of them? Leave a comment as a final farewell. 23. Chuck Willis, the king who wears the silent crown. He was a style icon, with his signature turban and velvety shoulder swing. Chuck Willis, the man who made post-war America sway to R&B, hits like CC Rider and It's Too Late climbed the charts. But no one expected that the man who revived traditional blues would die alone, without applause, without an audience. In April 1958, Atlanta was as hot as ever. Inside a small suburban apartment, Chuck lay curled up on the bed, breathing heavily. He had been sick with a stomachache for several days but refused to go to the hospital for fear of canceling his show. That night, he told his live-in girlfriend, "I just need to rest. I'll be fine tomorrow." But that was the last time she heard him. Hours later, when she woke up to the light still on, she found Chuck lying motionless, his face grimacing, his hand on his left chest. There was no crying, and no one called an ambulance. When the ambulance arrived, they confirmed only one simple thing: gastric hemorrhage, too much blood loss. And the scariest thing, on the bedside table, was a notebook with unfinished lyrics that had not been recorded yet. Nearby was an unsent letter to his mother, apologizing for not being able to buy the house as promised. No big funeral, no public memorial. The radio station just played a hasty news bulletin, then switched to sports news. Chuck was buried simply in the local cemetery, with no flashy tombstone. People never mentioned him again. Chuck died at the age of 30 when his career was at its peak, but his memory was suffocated by time. Maybe because he did not have time to create an immortal icon like Ray Charles or Sam Cooke, but maybe the world was too hasty to remember. Chuck's voice was once a refuge for the heartbroken and lost, and he, in the end, became the one the world left behind. The question is not why he died alone, but why no one remembers that he ever lived. If you ever shrugged along to CC Rider without knowing who was behind it, today, let's hold a moment of silence for the man. A forgotten genius, only because he died too soon and too quietly. 22. Jesse Belvin, the angel who sings the last goodbye. He was only 27 years old, but Jesse Belvin's voice was already known as the first black voice sweet enough to melt the ice of segregation. Some believe that if Jesse had lived, he would have been the king of soul, not Sam Cooke, but fate would have crushed that dream after one fateful night in Arkansas. On February 6, 1960, Jesse had just finished performing at an event that broke racial barriers the first time black and white people were allowed to sit together in a concert hall in Little Rock. However, the audience didn't know that Jesse had received several threatening letters before the show, demanding that he cancel. He went on stage anyway and sang the ballad Guess Who, as if saying goodbye to life. After the show, Jesse, his wife, and manager got into a car and left the city. 40 minutes later, the car crashed into a roadside post, flipping several times. His wife died at the scene. Jesse was seriously injured and died shortly thereafter. The police concluded it was an accident, but reports of brake cut marks later raised suspicion throughout the black community. No one was charged. The case was hushed up. Jesse's funeral was not televised. There was no apology from the city. Years later, people would whisper, "They killed him because he sang for both races." Jesse died quietly, but his song lives on. And every time you hear a soulful jazz song, remember that Jesse paved the way, with his blood, his voice, and his lonely death that no one dares to mention. 21. Johnny Adams, the canary singing in the dark. Johnny Adams was a quiet phenomenon. Few people knew that he sang gospel, soul, jazz, and blues with a voice so strange that people called him the male voice that is almost female. He had no national hits, but he was the most beloved person in the profession. The problem was that love did not save him from dying alone. In the late 1990s, Johnny lived alone in a small apartment in New Orleans. The apartment had been his makeshift recording studio. But when prostate cancer knocked on the door, he was no longer strong enough to go on stage. One winter afternoon, a neighbor recalled, "I heard the old music playing, then it stopped. I thought he was sleeping." 3 days later, the police had to break down the door. Johnny was found sitting in a chair, still wearing his sweater and scarf. The CD was still spinning in the player. There was no suicide note, no relatives, no one was there. He left this world like a stranger who was never properly welcomed. The funeral was brief, attended by only a few local artists. There was no televised memorial, no statue, no replay of that angelic voice. Johnny Adams sang like an angel, but died like a ghost. And if we still have the heart to listen, it is time to remember that voice and keep him alive in our memories. 20. O.V. Wright. The soul of the South dies in a house of despair. O.V. Wright was once called the soul of the American South. With his booming, weeping, singing voice, he brought soul gospel songs like A Nickel and a Nail and Ace of Spades deep into the hearts of listeners. But his life was never easy. Growing up in poverty, orphaned at a young age, O.V. had been in jail for drug possession. He later tried to kick his addiction and return to the stage, but the spotlight was gone. New recordings failed to sell. Shows were canceled because of a lack of tickets. As time went on, he became quieter. So quiet that when neighbors found his door ajar for 3 days without anyone in sight, they called the police. It was a damp afternoon in November 1980. The small house in the Memphis suburbs smelled musty, and there was no sound, no lights. When the police broke in, they found O.V. Wright curled up on the sofa, his eyes wide open as if he were still looking at someone. There was an untouched plate of food on the table, and next to it was an old, half-open Bible. He had been dead for at least 36 hours, a coroner recalled. No injuries, no struggle. His heart had simply stopped. The neighbor who lived across the street said 2 days ago, "I saw him come out to get the mail, but he didn't say hello to anyone. His eyes seemed to be thinking about something far away. No one knew who he had called for the last time. No new songs, no farewells, just a simple cremation ceremony." A few old friends came late because no one had heard the news early. O.V. Wright once shook the South with his singing, but when he passed away, there was no audience to witness him. There was only a silent room and an unfinished hymn. Perhaps, in that death, he was able to rest from loneliness, from unfinished dreams that had never been realized. In the rush of modern life, let's remember those who once lit up our souls with their songs. Don't let them go away again into our memories. 19. Z.Z. Hill. The man of the soul blues and the last journey that never returned. Z.Z. Hill never needed a big hit to be loved by audiences. He was the soul of soul blues, a genre that fused traditional black heartache with a modern urban sound. With songs like Love Is So Good When You're Stealing It and Down Home Blues, he was credited with bringing blues back to black audiences in the midst of the disco era. But behind the scenes was a weary man who felt left behind. Touring was exhausting, and his heart problems were getting worse. But he continued to play shows, sometimes with only a few dozen people in the audience. In April 1984, after a show in Texas, ZZ was driving home to Dallas alone, on the freeway. He lost control of his car and crashed into a median. He did not die instantly, but by the time the ambulance arrived, he had stopped breathing. The heart attack came too quickly, the medical examiner said. If he hadn't been driving alone, he might have survived. The heartbreaking thing was that he had no one in the car, no assistant, no family. The last trip of his career was just him and the deserted road. The rescue worker recalled, "I saw he still had a demo CD in his pocket. Maybe he was taking it to the studio." No one released the music. The family held a simple funeral. No major artists spoke out. He died exactly as he had lived, quietly, diligently, and always trying to do more for the music than for himself. ZZ Hill didn't need the limelight. He just wanted his music to touch the hearts of his listeners. And he did. Even though he died alone, he will never be forgotten in the hearts that saw themselves in his words. If you've ever heard Down Home Blues, share it today. That's a way to say that ZZ Hill is still alive in every R&B beat. 18. King Floyd, the king who disappeared in an empty apartment. King Floyd surprised the whole country with his hit Groove Me, a song that topped the charts in 1970. The song was rhythmic and youthful, like a breath of fresh air in the stagnant R&B scene. But then things slowed down. The next records were unsuccessful. King withdrew from the spotlight, living a reclusive life in the suburbs of New Orleans. Fans didn't even know if he was alive or dead. In 2006, King Floyd was found dead in his dilapidated one-story apartment, with no family nearby. He had lived alone for the last 10 years of his life, not interacting with anyone, appearing on television or performing. He paid his rent on time, said the landlord, but he never opened the door. We just knew him as the old man who sang in the old days. When he didn't show up for a week, they broke down the door. The scene inside left everyone speechless. The room was bare of valuables. On the table was an old cassette tape with the words "Groove Me Demo" written in handwriting. In the trash were prescriptions for high blood pressure and diabetes. The coroner said he died of a stroke. No one noticed until his body began to decompose. A neighbor shared, "I heard him singing softly every night, but I didn't know it was King Floyd." The death was unexpected. No one imagined a chart topper would die so quietly. King Floyd once made America groove, but it seems he lost faith in the spotlight too soon. He left no suicide note, no words of lamentation, only his old voice, echoing from the past. Some artists don't need the spotlight forever, they just need to be heard, even if just one more time. If you ever dance to Groove Me, remember him today, a lost soul in a small room, but once moved the world to her tune. 17. Jackie Moore, the silently forgotten queen of soul. Jackie Moore was a voice that touched the souls of black women in America in the 1970s. With her hit, Precious, Precious, she climbed the Billboard charts, becoming a symbol of strength and femininity amid the rising soul wave. But after a few short years of success, Jackie slowly disappeared from the public eye. Record labels dropped her, saying she was not young enough and not marketable enough. She lived quietly in Jacksonville, Florida, almost forgotten. But what made Jackie's passing even more poignant was not the oblivion, but the way she died alone, without a single newspaper report. In the last week before her death, neighbors found the lights in Jackie's house on for 3 days. She didn't go out, didn't take out the trash, and didn't go to church as usual. A woman named Gloria, who had lived next door for more than 20 years, recalled, "I knocked and knocked and no one answered, but I heard the radio playing an old song. It was like someone was listening to Jackie singing to me." When the police were called, they found Jackie Moore dead on the sofa. She was still holding an old Bible, her eyes slightly open as if she were dreaming. There was no suicide note, no family standing by. The medical examiner said she had a history of heart disease. She may have collapsed in her sleep, and no one knew for days. Strangely, an unreleased demo was found in the cassette deck next to her. She had been recording at home, even though no one had asked her to perform. It was as if her voice still wanted to be heard just one more time. But when Jackie died, the media did not mention her. The radio stations were silent. No one came to the funeral, except a few elderly neighbors. A legend died quietly, while a generation cried to her voice. There are voices that once embraced our pain with music, then disappeared as if they had never been there. Let us not let souls like Jackie Moore go forgotten again. We owe them a debt of gratitude and a little real listening. 16. Major Lance, the Prince of Soul, dies in a forgotten hospital bed. Major Lance was the golden voice of the Chicago soul movement. Hits like the Monkey Time and had America dancing in the 1960s. He performed with Curtis Mayfield and was hailed as the Prince of the Streets for his approachable style and youthful energy. But his aura faded quickly as the soul movement gave way to funk and disco. He became addicted to alcohol, lost his contracts, and was no longer invited to perform. In his final years, he lived in poverty, moving from one boarding house to another in Atlanta. It was said that he lived on welfare and performed sporadically at small clubs, sometimes without anyone recognizing the skinny man who had topped the charts. In September 1994, Major was hospitalized for heart complications. No one accompanied him, no wife, no children, no manager. He was very polite, but he always looked far away, recalled a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital one day. He asked me if I knew the song The Monkey Time. I nodded. He smiled and said, "I used to sing that song, but no one remembers it." A few days later, he died in his hospital bed. No one witnessed his final moments. His name was misspelled on the death certificate, a final slap to the fading memory of him. It was only a few weeks later that a small radio station discovered Major Lance's passing and started playing old hits. But the grief came too late. The artist who had once electrified the city of Chicago now rested in a deserted cemetery, without a prominent headstone, without a mention at any awards ceremony. Major Lance did not need a crown, but he deserved to be remembered as part of the soul of black music. And if your heart still beats when you listen to soul today, remember him, the man who made the world go round with just a smile and a looped melody. 15. Melvin Bliss, the man who built hip-hop, died in his own shadow. Melvin Bliss had only one hit, 1973's Synthetic Substitution, but that record became the cornerstone of an entire musical world. The drum riff in the song was sampled by hundreds of hip-hop artists from NWA to Public Enemy to De La Soul. Ironically, most audiences have never heard his name, and Melvin himself never received any money from the songs that used his work as a foundation. For 3 decades, he lived quietly in New York City, with no new albums, no interviews, no performances. In 2010, neighbors found him lying motionless in his dilapidated Bronx apartment. He had died a few days earlier. No one knew. Police had to use old papers and medical records to verify his identity. "I knew he was a singer," said a building janitor, but I never heard him mention any success. He was quiet, always wearing a hat, always walking very slowly, as if he was carrying his past on his back. In the small room, people found a few notes, including a scrawled line, "Music is from God. I am just the messenger." Melvin Bliss was not honored. No one knew he had died until a fan discovered the news in the city's death report. And although hundreds of millions of people had heard snippets of his music in hit rap songs, hardly anyone knew who he was. A quiet death of a man who laid the foundation for generations of other artists to soar. Imagine you create immortality, but you're forgotten. That's the pain Melvin Bliss carries with him. And if you're listening to any hip-hop today, you're probably listening to what's left of him. Take a moment to pause for the man whose name the world forgets, but whose voice it still hears every day. 14. Billy Stewart, the Cadillac drives into eternal silence. Billy Stewart was unlike any other singer of his time, with his distinctive word-bouncing technique. He turned ballads into unique experiences, like Summertime, a song that made America turn to look at a hulking black man, slurring each syllable like a live instrument. But his life was a series of silent resistance against obesity, racism, and a music industry that loved predictability. Despite his Billboard hits, Stewart never received real critical recognition. Many record labels shook their heads he was too unusual to sell. On January 17, 1970, Billy drove his Ford Thunderbird to Columbia, South Carolina, for a small gig. He had 3 band members with him. It was cold. The highway was slick. But what happened was more than an accident. Around 2 p.m., the car suddenly crashed through a guardrail and plunged into the Neuse River. No one survived. Relatives said that a few days earlier. Billy had been complaining about the condition of the steering wheel. A garage employee said he had noticed unusual tire wear, but his tight schedule prevented him from fixing it in time. A close friend called him that morning. Billy didn't answer. He usually didn't turn off his phone. His body was found 3 days later. He was still wearing his performance jacket. In the trunk was a handwritten sheet of music for a new, unreleased song. The police ruled it an accident, but fans couldn't understand why would a living artist die so suddenly and so quietly. Billy Stewart died at the age of 32. No televised funeral, no news bulletin. His signature phrasing now resonates only in the hearts of those who remember him. Some artists weren't born to fit the market, but they make the world bigger, livelier, deeper. Never forget those who dare to be different, dare to make their voice heard, even if in the end they die in silence. 13. Barbara Lynn, the woman who picked up the guitar and disappeared into time. Barbara Lynn was a phenomenon, the first black woman to play guitar and sing R&B on a national stage. In the 1960s, her hit "You'll Lose a Good Thing" put her on television. in magazines, and in the hearts of millions of young black girls. But the spotlight didn't last long. Record labels began to change. The market demanded a more seductive, softer singer. Barbara, with her Gibson guitar and strong, husky voice, became unmarketable. She retreated to a secluded life in Beaumont, Texas. In her later years, Barbara stopped performing. The small house she lived in was surrounded by an old iron fence and overgrown trees. She was very gentle, the neighbor recalled. Every morning she watered the plants, wore cloth gloves, and walked slowly, as if she were beating the rhythm of time. But around the beginning of 2023, no one saw her go out again. A nephew called the police, but they couldn't get through. When they entered the house, they found her dead 2 days ago. There were no signs of a struggle, no medications, only an old cassette player next to the bed, playing her voice. No big funeral, no words of sympathy from the artist community. An old friend revealed Barbara always said, if she died, she just wanted to hear herself sing one last time, and she did just that. Barbara Lynn proved that a black woman could hold a guitar, stand in the middle of the stage, and master her voice. If you ever hear that song, remember, she was not just a singer, but a pioneer forgotten by history. 12. Nolan Porter, the wanderer who fell on his last record. Nolan Porter is not a household name, but to the Northern Soul community in the UK and underground music fans in the US, he is a treasure. The song Keep On Keeping On, with its funk rhythm and defiant lyrics, is considered a spiritual revival for the young black generation. But Nolan's career was full of difficulties, although highly regarded. He was often rejected by record labels for being too artistic, not commercial. He survived by doing small shows, teaching music classes, and writing lyrics for others. In 2021, Nolan was diagnosed with severe kidney failure. He refused expensive treatment, choosing to stay in a small rented room in Van Nuys, California. The landlord recalled he seemed to be getting weaker, but he still sang every morning. I heard him recording himself once as if he was recording his last words. On the evening of July 30th, he sent an email to a friend with the subject line, "Finally." No one read it right away. When the motel manager opened the door 2 days later because of a strange smell, they found Nolan slumped next to his half-open laptop, the screen still lit with the recording interface. The headphones were still on his head. The final recording was incomplete. No news reports, no tributes. Only a few loyal fans set up a fan page to share, "He was the reason I got through my miserable youth." Nolan Porter died alone, but his voice continues to resonate in the hearts of those who saw themselves in those songs. Sometimes you don't need to be famous. You just need to touch someone with your music, and you've lived forever. You're halfway there, where memories and music meet in tears, but the 11 stories behind them are even more heartbreaking. Before we go any further, ask yourself, did they die alone? Or did the music industry that once applauded them turn its back on them? Who do you think is really at fault? 11. Don Covay, the man who wrote hits for the world, then disappeared into the stream of life. Don Covay was a rare talent. He not only sang himself, but also wrote songs for icons like Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett. His tune Chain of Fools is an immortal symbol, but in the shadows of the stage, Covay was a man who struggled all his life with being overshadowed by the very people he helped shine. He suffered from severe diabetes, suffered a stroke in 1992, and gradually lost the ability to perform. Don Covay's last day was without music. At a nursing home in New York, he lived quietly in his room, with no relatives or visitors. A nurse recalled that night. He asked to listen to his first recording again. He sat there, said nothing, just nodded his head to the beat. The next morning, he did not wake up. People said he died in his sleep, but no artist posted condolences. No newspaper ran breaking news, just a few short lines that passed by like an old news story. Don Covay gave the world unforgettable songs, but he left as if he had never existed. Sometimes, the person who writes for others to shine is forgotten in the spotlight. Remember him as a silent genius, living in the dark but bringing light to countless hearts. And Doris Troy, the angel voice that was never heard. Doris Troy was the one who made the world lift its head with the hit Just One Look. Her voice was once likened to an angel in the brilliant soul-pop dream of the 60s. She worked with the Rolling Stones, George Harrison, and Pink Floyd. But the spotlight did not shine forever. After a long time without releasing new products, she was gradually forgotten by young audiences and lived a secluded life in a small apartment in Las Vegas. In February 2004, neighbors did not see Doris go out to take out the trash as usual. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. When the police entered the house, she was dead on the sofa, eyes still open, an old record playing in the middle. No one was around. No one discovered it in time. A neighbor later said, "I always heard her singing softly in her room." But that week, there was complete silence. She died of complications from diabetes and kidney failure. But what hurt people more was that no one heard her singing for the last time. Doris had once sung for the whole world, but her death was witnessed by only the room, like her song. Just one look was enough to captivate people, and just one forgetfulness, enough to make a soul disappear in silence. 9. Arthur Alexander, the great teacher the whole world forgot. Arthur Alexander is a strange phenomenon. He was the only black singer to have been covered by the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Bob Dylan. Songs like Anna and You Better Move On changed the entire aesthetic of rock music in the early 1960s. But his life was a series of struggles and tears after several commercial failures. He left the music industry and went to work as a delivery man for a pharmaceutical company. In 1993, Arthur decided to make a comeback. He signed with a small label and began recording a new album. But just days after the first session, he suffered severe chest pains at home. A neighbor called an ambulance, but it was too late. He died of a heart attack, not living the rebirth he had been waiting for 20 years. Arthur thought the world had forgotten him, said a former colleague. "I think he died feeling like he was no longer needed. The media did not give it a big boost. Only a few soul fans have written belated tributes." Arthur Alexander was a musical soul whose voice many borrowed, but whose name no one remembered. Perhaps the most heartbreaking thing is not death, but not being remembered after you're gone. 8. Syl Johnson, the last warrior who fell in an age that no longer listened to his music. Syl Johnson was a warrior in music and society. He not only sang soul and funk songs like Different Strokes and Is It Because I'm Black, but also took the lead in suing white artists for plagiarism, defending copyright, and black dignity. But despite being an underground icon, Syl Johnson never received the same official recognition as his peers. In February 2022, just days after his daughter passed away, Syl quietly left this world. He lived in an old house in Chicago, filled with records, old tapes, and unfinished recordings. A close friend revealed Syl said he was out of this era. Nobody listened to soul anymore. Nobody wanted lyrics with messages anymore. The maid found him dead when she brought him breakfast. The TV was still on. On the screen was a playlist of modern rap videos. No one had ever mentioned his name. Syl Johnson fought not to be forgotten, but in the end, he died a man left behind by the times, an artist who made music to protest, to love, to maintain dignity. No one listened when he sang his last song. Some voices never catch on, but they are the foundation of history. Let's keep Syl's memory alive, because if we forget those who spoke up for justice, who will speak up for us? 7. Betty Wright, a powerful voice that fell silent in an empty room. Betty Wright was a feminist icon in soul music. With Clean Up Woman, she broke stereotypes, commanding the stage since she was a teenager. But behind the spotlight were years of quietly battling cancer. Despite her late honors, Wright lived a private life, and few people knew she was in the final stages of her life. In May 2020, her family said she barely wanted to see visitors. She asked that all electronic devices be removed from her room. "I just wanted to listen to the wind and sing softly to myself," she said. That morning, the nurse came in and found her lying on her side, eyes closed, smiling slightly, no machines, no applause, no one but memories. Betty Wright died the way she lived, strong, private, and without a clue. But the question remains, why did the woman who topped the charts leave so quietly? Remember her not just for her songs, but for her courage to be herself until the very end. 6. David Ruffin, the wanderer with the legendary voice. David Ruffin was the heart of the Temptations with the immortal My Girl. But behind the spotlight, he slid into drug addiction, rebellion, and was kicked out of the group. He wandered between cities, singing secretly in bars, wearing old suits and always wearing sunglasses, as if to hide a memory he didn't want anyone to see. In late May 1991, David showed up at a cheap motel in Philadelphia. He had no luggage. The receptionist said he just asked for a small room, saying he would only stay one night. The next morning, the housekeeping staff found him unconscious, later confirmed death from a dangerous drug overdose. No one knew who he had been with, no identification. Only when fingerprinting did the police know it was the legendary voice. David Ruffin died as an unknown person, but his voice did not. That was the most painful thing. A soul that had touched millions of people had no one by his side when he died. Live so that when you close your eyes, at least one person remembers that you once made them smile. 5. Bobby Womack, the storyteller who gradually lost his voice in the long, lonely night. Bobby Womack was a great storyteller of soul. Love songs like If You Think You're Lonely Now once brought audiences to tears. But his personal life was full of tragedy: drug addiction, loss of a child, divorce, Alzheimer's. In his old age, he still performed, although his memory was fading and his singing voice was no longer what it used to be. In 2014, in his Los Angeles apartment, he recorded himself. He was afraid of forgetting. An assistant said, every day, he would say, "I am Bobby, I lived, I loved." That night, he had trouble breathing, but refused to call an ambulance. In the morning, he collapsed in bed, eyes open, lips trembling as if he were still in the middle of something. Womack died at the border between memory and the present. No crowd, no background music, just the truth. The greatest storytellers often carry sadness in their hearts that no one else can tell. Cherish the people who can listen to you, because one day you will need someone to tell your story. 4. Donny Hathaway, the genius who fell off the balcony and no one could stop him. Donny Hathaway was a genius tormented by schizophrenia. His love songs, like A Song for You and This Christmas, remain precious legacies. But in his mind, there were always voices tormenting him. He tried, but the darkness in his head was too great. On January 13, 1979, Donny was invited to record again. Friends said he was very happy that day. He said he could hear the music again, no more a scary whisper. But a few hours later, he was found dead under the balcony of the Essex House Hotel in New York. The police ruled it a suicide. No suicide note, no obvious signs, just the sound of the wind, and a silence that has lasted forever in the music world. Donny Hathaway fell like a star from the sky, no farewell. But every time his music played, his soul seemed to be rebuilt. Sometimes, the most haunting thing is not the death. It is the fact that we do not understand them enough to hold them back. Listen carefully when someone sings from the heart, because it may be their last cry for help. 3. Sam Cooke, the king of soul, died bloodied and doubtful. Sam Cooke was an icon not only of music but also of the civil rights movement, but his death in 1964 turned all his glory into doubt. One December night, he was shot to death in a cheap motel in Los Angeles. The motel manager claimed that Cooke attacked her while searching for a girl he thought had been kidnapped, but many details don't match up. His clothes were torn, money was missing, there was no independent investigation. A bartender at a nearby bar said he didn't seem right that day. He seemed to be carrying something bigger than a hangover. Sam Cooke died alone, his reputation tarnished by scandal. And the question remains, was he murdered because of a misunderstanding, or because he dared to stand up for black rights when people wanted him to be silent? 2. Otis Redding, he who flies to the top and falls into the cold lake. Otis Redding had just finished recording Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay when he boarded the doomed flight. At just 26, he was the soul of modern R&B. But on December 10, 1967, his plane crashed into Lake Monona in dense fog. 8 people died, and only one survived. No one knows exactly why. A gas station attendant near the airport said he stopped by earlier, bought coffee, and sang in his car. There was something very quiet, like he knew it was the last time. Otis died before his revolutionary song was released. By the time it was released, he was already at the bottom of the lake. Sometimes, the brightest souls are the ones who leave first. Otis didn't just leave behind music, He left behind a void that has yet to be filled. 1. Marvin Gaye, a peace lover, died at the gunpoint of his father. Marvin Gaye was the voice of love and the desire for peace. But he was also a soul wounded by a violent childhood, addiction, and loneliness. On April 1, 1984, in a small house in Los Angeles, Marvin had a fierce argument with his father, Pastor Marvin Sr. Less than a minute later, gunshots rang out. Marvin collapsed on the floor, shot dead by his father. He had just turned 44 just one day before his birthday. A neighbor said, "I heard screaming," then silence, then the cry from his mother. Marvin died not because of society, not because of his enemies, but because of the person who should have loved him the most. That death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a wake-up call about the invisible wound in every family, and the truth that sometimes, love cannot save the person who needs to be loved the most. We can't change how they died, but we can change how they are remembered. Tell their stories, play their songs, and listen to your heart. Because sometimes, the simplest understanding is the most precious gift a lonely soul can ever hope for. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey of grief. If these stories touched you, please like, share the video, and leave a comment about your favorite artist. Every interaction you make is a tribute, a way to keep them forever.